thank the member. The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Banks.
Well, thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, and I'm very pleased to be standing here today to speak in favour of the original appropriations bills and against the amendment as moved by the opposition. Now, these appropriations bills represent one of the first steps for the government in cleaning up the very substantial mess that we've been left with by the previous Labor government. And what a mess it is. And it's a mess that has a wide range of different aspects to it. But one of the most critical parts of that mess is the debt situation that unfortunately our nation is now burdened with. Now, of course, we face a situation, Mr Deputy Speaker, with whereas the previous government came in with no net debt and, in fact, money in the bank, we now have a very substantial net debt of some circa $200 billion, and we also have a situation where that debt is set to grow very, very substantially unless the government acts. Now, the extraordinary thing is that over the next 4 years of the forward estimates period, MyEFO estimated that $123 billion of additional deficits would be added to what is already a very sore and sorry budgetary position. So that is a very substantial addition to the debt that we would face should we follow the existing policies of the previous government. And even worse, Mr Deputy Speaker, over the next decade, MyEFO forecast that if the budgetary position isn't addressed, that the debt of the Commonwealth by the end of that period would be some $667 billion. $667 billion. That's 2/3 of a trillion, and it is a completely unacceptable situation. And it's characterised by the fact that the Labor government, and in fact Labor governments over a long period, just cannot balance the books. So the last time the Labor government, when in power, had a surplus budget was 1989. Now, that's a very long time ago, Mr Deputy Speaker, 1989. So we've got 1989, 1990, 1991, 92, 93, 94, 95, and then, of course, into the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd period. More deficits in 2008, 2009 again, then 2010, 2011, and of course 2012. And so you sort of say to yourself, Deputy Speaker, if it happened occasionally, maybe for 1 or 2 years in a particularly difficult economic period, it might be understandable. You know, the reasonable person might say, well, I can understand why it was necessary to temporarily go into deficit for those 1 or 2 years. But that's not the situation that occurred under the previous government. What occurred under the previous government and the one before that was structural ongoing deficits, an addiction to spending and an inability to spend less than we take in. And that's the simple nub of the issue, Mr Deputy Speaker. If you consistently spend more than you take in, you're going to get into trouble. And that's the case for families, it's the case for small businesses right around my electorate and indeed the nation, and it's certainly the case for governments. So cleaning up that debt position is certainly one of the key tasks for this government. You do ask yourself in detail, though, how did this situation actually arise? How could it get that bad? And of course, one of the key areas where we saw a huge blowout in expenditure under the last government was, of course, border protection, or the lack thereof. Now, of course, when the government came in, the border security policies of the Howard government were working very effectively. As the previous member mentioned, a strong humanitarian program was in place. It was being managed in an orderly fashion, and illegal boat arrivals had slowed to virtually none. But what the previous government did was say, well, look, let's change something which is working extremely well. Let's fundamentally dismantle a system which is serving the Australian people extremely well. And in the process, let's spend billions and billions of dollars of borrowed money. And that is the sad reality of the previous government's border security policies, which saw a budget blowout of more than $6 billion and spending of $11 billion or more. And there were so many examples of this sort of policy on the run, lack of attention to detail, and a real lack of understanding of how to manage programs in an operational sense. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's very, very easy to put out a press release. It doesn't take a long time. You type it up, you send it out, and it's very, very simple. It's much harder to actually manage organisations effectively, especially organisations of the size and complexity of the federal government. But what we saw under the previous government was an addiction to the media cycle, to responding to the day's events, and often in a way that was detrimental to the financial position of this country, feeding into this huge debt burden which we now face. And of course, a prime example of that was the decision in relation to live animal export. Now, of course, many members from your home state of Queensland and from other parts of the nation were affected, their electorates were affected very significantly by the government's knee-jerk reaction to ban the live export industry pretty much overnight. And the extraordinary thing about that was the fact that it was such a harsh and ill-considered plan, taken so quickly, and had a huge negative impact on ordinary families right around the country. So much so that the previous government actually sort of acknowledged the mistake they'd made and said, well, gee, we better put together some sort of assistance package for these communities which we have hit so hard with this poor policy. Now, that cost about $100 million, that assistance package. And if you hadn't have banned the industry overnight in such a superficial and shallow fashion, you wouldn't have had to then spend $100 million trying to rescue it. And a really relevant example, I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of the lack of management expertise of the previous government, and a lack of financial acumen and lack of respect for money, which was not only an evidence in the big programs, the pink bats, the NBN, of course, really a national joke under the Labor Party, but also in small amounts that really give you an interesting and scary insight into the way the previous government used money. And one of those examples is the spending on advertising of border protection policies prior to the last election. Now, you might recall, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that there was very, very scary newspaper ads and gravely intoned radio advertisements supposedly targeted people smugglers and encouraging them to not ply their trade, but oddly advertised in rural, regional and metropolitan Australia, where people smugglers are not typically based. And there was about a $2 million spend on that program. So in the scheme of an enormous budget, it's a relatively small amount of money. But it tells you something very, very important about the attitude towards spending of the previous government. What it tells you is that there was a lack of respect for those funds, and a lack of appreciation of the fact that the government doesn't generate income. The government doesn't create economic activity. The government is simply the beneficiary of it when it occurs through taxation. So all of that money that the government takes in has in fact been created by the hard work of Australian families and Australian businesses, and whether it's pay-as-you-go tax or company tax or capital gains or whatever the source of revenue, the government didn't do any of that. The government didn't work 40 or 50 hours a week, having their tax taken out of those funds. The government didn't take an entrepreneurial risk and employ people and go and really put their necks on the line to generate economic activity. The government didn't do any of those things. The government was simply the beneficiary of that hard work, and for the government to treat that money without respect is absolutely wrong. So it's a big task that we face before us, and these appropriations bills represent one of the first steps in addressing it. But there are some important steps that have already been taken by the government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Environmental approval, so many projects held up but the Minister for the Environment has given approvals for some $400 billion worth of environmental projects, infrastructure projects and the like, and that means jobs in the creation of those projects, and it also means an ongoing economic benefit from the fact that those projects will exist. Red tape, of course. Now, anyone who's in business, especially small business, doesn't like red tape, Deputy Speaker. Frankly, if you're in business, big or small, you've got better things to do than fill out forms for the government. You are worried about your business, you are worried about employing people, you're worried about paying the bills. The last thing you want to do at 8 or 9 o'clock at night when the day is done is get your HB pencil out and start filling in some forms for the government. So wherever we can minimise that regulatory burden, that's exactly what we should do. And the member for Kooyong has a tremendous initiative in place, Repeal Day, coming up soon, where the government will be legislating to repeal more than 8,000 regulations, which are obviously a particularly important initiative for the government. We've got to get rid of the carbon tax, of course, Deputy Speaker, and the carbon tax causing such a drag on the economy at the moment. Of course, the comments of Mr Borghetti, the CEO of Virgin Australia, were well reported last week, but really demonstrating that the carbon tax has numerous impacts, but one of them is the financial cost to the companies who have to pay it and to the households that have to pay higher electricity and other bills. But the other is the contraction of economic activity, which results from that additional cost. Because, like in any business, if you've got additional costs, that's a problem for you, and you need to adjust your activities. You need to perhaps to cut back in a certain area, not do something you were planning on doing because you now have this additional cost. So if that cost wasn't in place, it would not be necessary for such significant changes to have to occur. So getting rid of the carbon tax is absolutely fundamental, and that is an important initiative for the government. Of course, free trade, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a great driver of economic activity, and the government has already got strong runs on the board with the South Korean free-to-air, which will take tariffs off some 99.8% of Australian products into South Korea. And importantly, Mr Deputy Speaker, for my electorate of Banks, the government is working on a free trade agreement with the Republic of China. My electorate has the largest number of people of Chinese background of any electorate in Australia. There's a very, very warm and close relationship between my electorate and the people of China. We have many students who are here from China who are studying in our universities and colleges, and many businesses in my electorate which work closely in both the import and export with China and related markets. So free trade, important part of the government's agenda, and certainly will be of great benefit to my electorate in those discussions in relation to China. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, these appropriations bills, as I said, are an important first step in addressing the enormous mess that the Labor Party has left behind. It's incumbent on a new government to look honestly at the situation, to look the Australian people in the eye and say that when things aren't right, that they're not right, and we're going to put them right. And as the Prime Minister and the Treasurer have said, not all of those decisions are easy. Not all of those initiatives are simple to take, but they need to be taken because we can't just sort of sleepwalk into the future as the previous government was doing. We can't just keep spending and spending like money is going out of fashion. We need to take an orderly and sensible approach to financial management. We need to make sure that when we spend $1 of the people's money, that in our minds is this a good use of their hard-earned funds? Is this something that needs to be done? And if it isn't something that needs to be done, then it can't be done, Mr Deputy Speaker, because managing the budget carefully is absolutely critical. The fact that we are on track for a net debt position of some $2/3 of $1 trillion in 10 years if we don't change course is a frightening statistic. It's something that we can't allow to happen, and it's certainly not something that this government will allow to happen, because we will be making a number of important changes to get this country back on track, and passing these appropriations bills is an important step in that. Thank you.
I thank the